So yeah, our last panelist today is Jonathan. So I will give the mic. Do you want me to zoom in a little bit here, or it's okay?
It's okay.
Yeah, okay.
As long as people can hear. Everybody can hear me? So I will do a presentation that will weave music in with thinking. And as a scholar practitioner and a Raga musician and a jazz musician who grew up playing saxophone and a Raga musician that lived in Calcutta learning Raga music, I'm engaging with academics from a scholar practitioner perspective. And I wrote a paper to read, but I felt much more called to actually try to weave the music in, because the music is so much, it's an integral part of the type of thinking that I'm trying to do. So I will be improvising my way through this musically and through thinking, trying to find the horizons between thinking and music. And I think that there's a lot of common themes that have been going through this panel already. Sudipta, homecoming, and the idea of ritual, and then in Sonu, this idea of music as a site of transgression, and these are themes that are important as well to my talk here. A little bit more about the methodology I've been learning with Dr. Banerji, who's I'm happy to have here, and he has been teaching a form hermeneutics called immanent hermeneutics, and I'll read a quick quote, which is really the invitation to my research here. The basis of this methodology is holistic. It's an interpretation of the cultural history of the praxis and the spatio-temporal meanings this makes possible. In engagement with the paradoxical goal of becoming towards a plane in which absolute monism and integral pluralism coexist as one without erasing or subordinating another. And this would be a goal of becoming, and I'll be developing upon this using Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga metaphysics as taught by Dr. Banerji. So the thesis of this paper, this presentation, is how can Raga music be practiced and understood as an individual and collective sonic ritual or sonal ritual? And how can this, in the practice of this and the experience of this, be experienced as an integral image, which may help in the cultivation of an integral consciousness and the realization of a spiritual politics based on divine anarchy. And in this sense, I'm framing a raga as not just a musicological, like understanding it not just musicologically, but understanding it as a psycho-cosmological structure of shared aspiration. And as we go through the presentation, I will be playing a little bit, which is hopefully going to be building, as we go, how I have come to experience and feel that a raga can be understood also, not only as a sonic ritual, but as a sonic yantra. So I went to live in Calcutta for about a decade, and I would like to contextualize a little bit of the culture that I learned the music within, and how it has a braided history that I'm understanding between two different tropes here. The sannyasa as a spiritual renunciant, in which a raga is a spiritual technology of becoming, and it leads to the goals of the type of practice that you are practicing, at least and based on a certain metaphysics. So the moksha, which would be liberation outside of life, or jivan mukti, freedom and within life. And sannyasa can be thought in distinction to samsara, which would be a worldly enjoyer. And this can play out, I see how this plays out in the history of Indian music, as through the classical arts, as they were patronized in the royal imperial courts in Mughal and pre-Mughal Hindu imperial courtly cultures. And in this context, raga music can be understood as cultivating a connoisseur culture, a culture of connoisseuring the raga, in which one enjoys and consumes this music as an object or a flavor of consumption. And while living in Calcutta, I found that both of these coexist in contemporary raga music practice within the practitioners and within myself as well. And so how have, my question was, how has these two tropes kind of transposed themselves and modulated into modernity and into contemporary times? And this creates a certain tension, this braided fate is also a tension between raga music as a technology of transcendence or as a flavor of consumption within what Banerji calls an ontology of ownership. If we look at our modern epoch as being contained within this type of ontology, then music is always, and raga music will always be received and engaged in which it was an object to be owned, to be consumed. And this is what I found to be troubling. And I was wondering how we can kind of think beyond this dialectic. Is there another way in which we don't fall on one side of the other, following the pureness of the past and rejecting the contemporary container we live in? Or we just embrace technology and we embrace the contemporary times and the markets, and we kind of compromise some of the traditional ideals. So I learned raga music as a sadhana of Aurobindo's integral yoga, as taught by my first and my main guru, Shantanu Bhattacharya. And based on the goals and the metaphysics of Aurobindo's integral yoga, we have an imminent and world-affirming goals based on jivan mukti and liberation within life, but as well the goal of transformation and the spiritualization of materiality and matter itself. And through recontextualizing the praxis of raga music, the sadhana, the spiritual discipline of it, I feel that this can open to understanding raga music as functioning as an individual and collective sonic ritual. And this offers possibilities beyond the individualistic notion of spiritual cultivation of the I, in which the I would just either escape or would enjoy the life through my own individualistic pursuits. But also, it helps us get out of the opposite of that, in which we are captured by a they, in this sense, the culture industries. But how can we see this as more of a community of practitioners and aspirants which share a common goal, which form a we? And following the French philosopher Gilbert Simondon, we can call this a transindividuation. So we would have individuation in co-creative relation to collective individuation. And transindividuation would be, in the most simple sense, understood as the unity of these two individuations. So getting a little bit more into how I understand this raga music as accomplishing these types of goals of becoming. So integral yoga is largely based upon an Upanishadic praxis. In this yoga, one first embarks upon, in Aurobindo formulation of it, that you build an intuitive mentality, and then you would aim to cultivate, stabilize, and normalize an integral consciousness, which acts through knowledge by identity. understood Upanishadically as through the self-revelatory acts of seeing and hearing. So seeing drishti and hearing shruti. And this is important in our discussion because I find that raga music not only employs hearing, shruti, but also an act of seeing. And these two modalities I found working within me in the sadhana of raga music. And so how is it that we can bring these two types of darshans, in a way, or self-revelatory knowledges, to integrally be simultaneously exist and be together? Okay, so now I'm going to frame a little bit more about how I understand a ritual space, because a sonic ritual is a ritual. So according to Sri Aurobindo, a Hindu ritual or a puja can be considered as an architectonic organization of a sacred, spatial, and with sacred, spatial, and temporal materials, which create an interface or sieve, pavitra, with the outside. This is an arrangement between individual and cosmic forces and transcendent potentials, and it facilitates an interface between the infinite and the finite. To quote Sri Aurobindo, the cosmic powers act and exist. Humankind takes them upon himself, makes an image of them in his own consciousness, and endows that image with the life and power that the Supreme Being has breathed into his own divine forms and world energies. And I'd like to point out this notion of an image. So, now how it can, raga music, how do we think about raga music and this ritual space? And so, yeah, in my experience, I've said before here, raga music is a spiritual discipline or sadhana, and it's based on an experimental method of intensifying states of conscious will through concentration and contemplation and its realization. And this activates a sonal ritual to slowly evoke an effective gravity in a collective sound space. And it forms an aesthetic plane of consistency, which we can call a bhav, which then precipitates as a raga deity. So by approaching this raga deity with devotion, surrender, one can enter into identification with the raga, and that can culminate in an aesthetic rupture called Rasa, invoking more than human individuating singularities. And this raga space that I'm speaking about is not just about on a musical level, it's not just even on a sonic level, but it's a heterogeneous site of becoming composed of multiplicities of musical and transmusical elements. So of course we have the musical elements like the speed in which you play, the notes that you play, the structure of the phrases and the mood. But you also have the techniques of the instrument, and you also have the space that you are in, whether it's your own practicing room or your house or a temple, and you have the participants in this ritual space who are listening and who are actively part of this space. And so we're opening up understanding raga outside of just a musical context. Okay, so traditionally, raga has been understood as a scale, a mode, or a melodic form with an ascent and descent, which can be true on the very surface of things, but definitely we can't reduce it to that. I'm going to quote an early Indian musicologist, Ganguly, who describes the raga as being made of a sound image and a form image. And this is an interesting way which provides a link not only to the notion of how an image can function in ritual space, like I mentioned in Aurobindo's quote, but bringing together thinking about a yantra as a form image and the becoming of that yantra in duration, as in this case, is a sound image. And so bringing back these two ideas of seeing and hearing through some kind of image, through these revelatory images. And so this brings us to think about mantra and yantra, which is a part of the traditional tantric practice. And I won't go into detail about either one of these because we're in a conference of South Asian studies, and I will assume that we have a basic understanding of mantra and yantra. And it means I can play more. But before that, I will actually just try to invite you to consider what I'm playing now with a little bit more of with a form of a yantra. So if you can think about any diagrammatic image, a yantra, if you prefer, from the Indian tradition, would be what I'm speaking about. But I'd like you to really consider that center point, the bindu. And I'd like you to consider that this drone that I'm playing and the main note that is providing the canvas which I am playing the raga on as that bindu. And try to experience the music from that place. So the main note that I was playing, all these phrases around, was called the sa in Indian music terminology. And this is being reinforced by the drone. And this would be one way to think about the bindu point, in which all of the other relationships in the yantra are centralized around. And this bindu point is an infinitely regressive point that continues. You'll never get to the end of it. And so this is how that sa can act, and it does act in the sadhana of music. Every single day you tune yourself, it's the attunement of your body and the different planes and parts of the being to that bindu, which is represented by the sa. And to get a little bit more into the raga, how the raga can be understood as this yantra, and how we can understand it in relation to the other terms that I've been bringing in here. I'm gonna describe the form image of the raga as the architectonics, which is really the essence of this raga deity. And you can realize this through contemplating the kind of the essence or the beingness of this raga deity. And it's composed of a constellation of musical phrases and the architectonics in which those phrases expand and contract. And so bringing it right back to this notion of the sa, or the center point, the bija of or bija in the sound form here, but the seed form of this, which can be contained in the center of the mandala. And so this is the form image, and it can be understood as the yantra. Now the second element, and that one you can realize by seeing, it corresponds to the seeing. So the second element, which is going to be the sound form, or the sound image, We have the phraseology of the raga. So it's the deployment of this architectonic, this virtual architectonic essence into becoming, and it's realized through hearing. And this can be likened to the metaphysics of the mantra. And so in a sense, this completes the idea of as a yantra in becoming, in time, perpetually being reborn, to use Devashish's phrase. I'd like to try to play and demonstrate a little bit more of how the architectonics work in ragas, so as to compose these types of geometries, these sonic architectures, if you will. This raga I'm playing is called Rag Todi, and it has, like many of the grand ragas of North Indian tradition, some very important symmetries that are built into the music that can perpetuate the music. On one of my first trips to Calcutta, my guru Shantanu said the potency of the raga is infinite, which is a phrase, an idea that I will always grapple with throughout my life, because how do you realize that, and what does that really mean? But getting deeper into the tradition, I believe that it's like the grand ragas, which are the ones that can be equal to that phrase, are the ones that have these very, very deep and quite sometimes very perfect symmetries in different places. So, for instance, try to hear how the phrases reflect each other as I geometrically transpose them from different places in the scale. And in that sense, you can see the construction of how this can start opening into a yantric seeing. Verse. Here's an exact mirror image. Okay, I just have one more section here I'd like to get to. Obviously this is something that what I'm trying to express has been in the workings in myself for 15 years. And so I'm trying to share that because I think the music does the best job. But with deeper introspection, I hope that you would, and with also musicological understanding, it would help bring out this diagram that I'm trying to share. So, this idea of revelatory seeing and hearing. My question is, what is when we can integrally experience these two together? What is the result, or how can we understand that? And I found it to be a very interesting experience that definitely goes beyond description, really. But drawing upon the aesthetic theory in India of Rasa, the Rasa theory, I thought this was a very interesting place to situate this question. And this is an old idea in India that was developed upon in later years by Abhinavagupta. And so what would an integral experience of Rasa be? And so by cultivating an integral consciousness, which can overcome the absolute ontological duality between seeing and hearing, or seeing as revelatory knowledge of being, and hearing as revelatory knowledge of the becoming of that being. And so not having to have one or the other. And this helps us to overcome this idea of seeing, or this revelatory knowledge, as a transcendental idea or form and a static image of being. And therefore, in the more classical image of thinking, then becoming or hearing in this sense would be a fallen representation from this image. But my question is really actually about how these two can integrally coexist simultaneously as a form of knowledge and as a form of taste. And I think that the relation between revelatory seeing and hearing can actually be expressed in those terms. And so therefore we would have the idea of an integral rasa image that has come from this practice. And so based on the discussion of the raga as a sono yantra, this could be understood as we're disappearing into that bindu of the yantra, and which is going to unbind the finite, opening us to the infinite. And so this is a psycho-cosmological practice and diagram that opens us to the experiencing radical infinity. And from this perspective, the Sono-Ritual can act as what Banerji describes as a crystal image, which is really that bridge or the interface between eternity and time. In the words of Banerji, an eternal event sounds like a paradox. Events occur in time, while eternity, no time. So an eternal event is a bridge between eternity and time. In fact, it is the origin of time, a reoccurring image which structures time. It thus may be called a time image or time crystal. This is an image or idea that encapsulates the properties of eternity as an exploration in time, an idea that gives birth to an eternal exploration is an eternal event. And just to finish here in my conclusion, Aurobindo gives us a metaphysics and a practice to cultivate an integral consciousness, which can simultaneously know through knowledge by identity the realms of being and becoming as integral knowledge. Therefore, an integral realization and approaching and framing raga music as a sono-ritual would be the simultaneous knowing and seeing of the ideational seed form of the raga and hearing of these virtual potentials in the becoming. I propose that this can be understood as an integral form of rasa or integral rasa image, which is the relation between darshana, seeing, and hearing. This is an intuitive knowledge understood as a suprasensible taste of the divine of the divine. I'm going to end with a quote from Dr. Banerji, which can contextualize this in the goal of transindividuation. Quote, modernity has brought us into a multicultural experience in which we may come across emotional responses developed in other cultures that are alien to us. A pluralized impersonal taste for life experience may equip us to take in all the tastes or rasa of the world with an equal appetite. Developing such an equal emotional response against the grain of our preferences would constitute an active equality of the emotions. This would lead to the spiritual fulfillment, to the perception of the divine at play in the world in all experiences, and allow us to live in the consciousness of divine bliss or ananda. And so we can see how within these goals and these metaphysics that we can consider raga music as having and giving birth to new possibilities of ethics and politics and aesthetics. Thanks. If I had time, I'd play one.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, let's take some questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand or just open your Okay, John. Oh, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Wow. Okay. So all very fascinating. So what are like would be like a good introductory book for studying this?
Studying North Indian raga music in general, or studying the
Yeah, well, I mean, this is all very deep stuff. It's like, yeah, what would be like a good starting point? Because it looks like it's, you're using images, mandala, music, and everything. So it's,
I mean, I would recommend Debashish's book, The Seven Quartets of Becoming, which doesn't deal with raga or music specifically, but it definitely deals with the larger metaphysics that I am drawing upon, and the interpretation of the record of yoga, which was Aurobindo experimental practice in the first formulation of integral yogas. So that would be one place to start. On the musical side, I mean, what I've been speaking about is actually drawn from a larger paper that is being published in a volume of posthumanism in India. What was the name of it again?
Critical cartography.
Critical cartographies for Bloomsbury. Posthumanism. Yeah, and that's going to be coming out soon, and we'll include a lot of other very interesting papers.
yeah, I had met, I don't know if you're familiar with the writings of Dr. Antonio de Nicolas.
Yes.
But I met him a while back, and when I'm hearing you talk, it's like, oh wow, it's the same, it's the same philosophy and language and everything like that. So he was always about talking about the making of images and things like that. So it's very interesting to hear you speak of that.
Yes, thank you. I'll check out Debashish. You're familiar. I'll check that out. Debashish can point me in the right direction. And yes, I didn't. A lot of my work is kind of also bringing in continental philosophy. And this paper I chose to take out the Western references I'm thinking along with. But right now, going deep in my studies with Debashish on Bergson, Henri Bergson, who is, I think, gave us a very important idea behind our concept of the image. That's also where my research is taking me.
Yeah, so definitely want to learn. What's your name again? I'm sorry. Maybe do you have like a website or something where I could look you up or your work as well?
Yeah, it's simple, jonathank.ca. And there's some music and some other art-based scholarship there as well.
Is it K-A-Y or?
Yeah, JONATHANKAY.ca.
Okay, .ca. Okay, very cool.
You could also point out the book by O.C. Ganguly that you mentioned.
Oh, sure. The traditional one? Right. Yes. Okay. So going right back to the sources, that's exactly addressing the question more clearly. So yeah, O.C. Ganguly was the musicologist that I was quoting from, and the book is called Rags and Raginis. And his interpretation of, in that early time, I believe it's around the 20s and 30s he's writing, but it's actually I think quite a more of a spiritual approach, psycho-spiritual approach to the music rather than the musicological approach, which is also, I mean, that would be more common in my experience of researching about ragas.
Yeah, Dr. De Nicolas, he also related it to the work of to Plato and Socrates, the allegory of the cave and everything like that. So there's definitely a connection there. I'm looking forward to studying.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's one part of the octaves in the cave and the other's outside. I'm like, how does that work?
Nice. Yeah. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Margaret, yeah, do you want to say anything?
Oh, just, Jonathan, thank you so much. The integration between the music and the text, the explanation of Sri Aurobindo in these contexts, and obviously referencing Debashish. Thank you. Nice presentation, integral presentation.
Thanks, Margaret.
So I have a question, Jonathan.
Yeah.
So you started by talking about samsara and sannyasa, and then you brought in this yantra and mantra and you also spoke about Abhinava and Rasa. So oftentimes, there's a recent critique, recent meaning, I think not that recent, but somewhat recent critique of Abhinava Gupta that says that essentially what he did is he appropriated the practices of the outside, the practices of wandering minstrels that used to be called yogis, and turned it into a kind of a courtly aesthetics. So that question remains as to how the first part of your paper connects with the second part of your paper.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I didn't develop upon that because I felt like, I mean, and he's coming from he's a Kashmiri Shaivist, so it would still be an alternative goal of becoming that I think you could argue would be part of that dialectic. And so I think that's where, for me, the integral goal of becoming then displaces the fact, well, this is either for your own liberation, which is ultimately just apersonal and outside of time and life and image in a way, or it diverts into the culture of the court. So,
Yeah, I would say that the dialectic remains through history. I mean, you can issue that critique all the way up to the present, and even more so today than ever before, because the two have been totally sundered in modernity, the outside and the inside, so to speak. In a way, Plato's caves, the cave on the outside and the inside of the cave, it goes back. So the question is, how do we create a people to come? I think that becomes your project in the sense of, as you started, the whole issue of samsara and sannyasa and the resolution of the dialectic in terms of the inside and the outside, the image and the text, or the image and the performance.
And then what about like it seems to me also that the method, the immanent hermeneutic, is not just a method of scholarship. It's a psycho-cosmological, which is individual and collective too. And I think that's where this quote at the end is very thinking that as obviously part of this method in which we have shared aspirations and shared goals, yet are not able to be captured and then deployed by the mind, but to be part of this kind of an affective community, right? To quote Gandhi, but
so this is too short a paper to bring it out, but I guess that would be the kind of overarching, unifying theme.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your conversation. So do we want to take one more question, or is okay to end here? If anyone wants to have any questions?
Hi, yes.
Oh,
Hey, Jonathan. Anshul here. Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed it, especially, interspersed with the pieces that you were playing. They were very evocative. I have a question regarding raga music and, how in raga music, each raga is supposed to be played during a certain time of the day, and there is this relation between the time of the day and raga. And so I was wondering about what is the relation with the raga and time in terms of maybe in a certain Bergsonian sense of duration, and how do you see that vis-a-vis Shruti and Drishti? Does it playing a particular raga in that particular time, is it more conducive to tuning into that space of Shruti or Drishti, or what has been your experience vis-a-vis that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry. So yeah, I think that that's the main line, the main tradition line that I learned is that is, yes, you accept that that's true. And this has been a tradition that's being carried on for centuries, and there's a reason for it. But when you ask people, well, why do we do this? You get either some answers that are different than each other, you get different answers, a whole multiplicity of answers, and then you get other people that say, I don't know, I just do it because that's what the tradition told me to do. But there is a lot of also stories about great maestros having experiences where it's kind of like the sonic ritual opens them, and it's really they'll have transpersonal experiences in which the music and the performer and the audience and nature all kind of the aesthetic rupture of rasa happens. So for me, as an outsider initially coming to this music, I said, well, why would I just accept that? Is it absolutely true? Is this a truth that in North India this is the way it is? So I took it more as an invitation. And as I was building myself and rebuilding myself through engaging with not only the musical practice of raga music, but the whole psycho-cosmological sadhana of the music, which is not predefined, but is really an invitation to contemplate, to meditate, and to try to build conditions of experience in which something like this can happen. And so I found myself very compelled at times to not just accept that this raga is for this time of day, but actually to go into nature at that time and play the music, or to engage with the kind of myths, the mythos of the ragas. Like, for instance, there's a morning raga called Bhairav, and my guru described it. Again, this is just one of many different ways to describe raga. He's describing the third note of the raga as when the sun comes over the horizon for the first time, and you can just see the first ray of light. So when you reach that note, that's that feeling, So what's that experience like? Well, you have to play that raga and go in and wait for the sun to rise. And I found myself in Darjeeling at the top of, I think it's called Tiger Hill, one of the lookout points. And we arrived very early, so I started singing a Drupad Alap. And it was about 20 minutes, but I wasn't getting to that note until I saw the first ray of light. And when that first ray of light came, I sang the God. And I tried to open myself to the possibilities of an experience. And that was actually one that was very profound. And so I took it as an invitation, and I was open to building myself accordingly. And some myths from the tradition really I've internalized them, and they've become very alive. They've become part of the machine, the yantric machine, on a psycho-cosmological level. And other ones maybe I haven't as much, but I think this is where there's no absolute truth in that. It's a matter of, do you build yourself and experience this, and what is your experience of it? And so that's where I think that my engagement with the tradition is not just to accept it as this is the truth, and I have to accept that and not question it, but it's really about a matter of embedding yourself within it and then trying to realize it for yourself. And sometimes my realizations correspond very deeply with what I had directly learned from the tradition, and sometimes it's a little bit unique because I live in a unique time and place from when these myths are coming. So that's how
That's beautiful. That's beautifully put. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that experience on Tiger Hill. And yeah, it's beautiful how you've been able to approach this so integrally. It's remarkable. Thank you.